And we are live on YouTube, and I will now welcome everybody. Hi, everybody. If you're just joining us, this is the Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall. We'll get started in just a few minutes. If you're just joining, this is the Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall. We just opened the doors. Takes a few minutes to let everybody in. Welcome. If you're just joining us, we'll get started in just a few minutes. Thanks for joining. We'll give it one more minute and then we'll get started. Welcome, everybody.
Can you open up the chat, Matt?
Okay, let's get started. Good evening, everybody. My name is Matt Losack. I'm the co-founder and executive director of the Montgomery County Renters Alliance. Joining me is Renters Alliance staff, Jackie Machinia, our outreach director, Emily Towie, our outreach coordinator, Pat Beckham, one of our outreach staff, Tim Wong, our outreach coordinator, Wah Ho, our Governor Westmore Service Year Program intern, whose camera's not working, but she's listening in. And we'll be joined by Matt Cornoyer, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, from the Department of Housing and Community Affairs, who will be giving us a very informative overview, not just of the rent stabilization law, but of its relationship, if any, to the multi-housing development permitting going on in the county. We have heard for a long time now a narrative which we have not considered credible, that somehow rent stabilization, good cause eviction, and other renter protections are going to lead to the demise of housing production in Montgomery County or any place that enacts such legislation. And there was a dip in housing production for a period of time. But people who've been studying this recognize that that dip had a lot more to do with other factors. And I'll let Matt Cornoy get into it when he gets into his presentation. But suffice it to say, there is a large and very well-financed landlord developer industry that does not want its prerogatives to evict without a stated reason or to raise rents as much as they want without any responsibility for housing stability and affordability. And they don't like to be regulated. these regulations protect the stability, quality, and life of our communities and our prosperity. And that's why we put them forward. But we're all ears. If somebody has a good argument as to why these are bad ideas, we're willing to listen. But we haven't heard one yet. What we've heard is a little bit of lies and distortions. So we're very grateful that the Department of Housing and Community Affairs and others, frankly, around the country have looked into the relationship between renter protections and housing production. And I think what they have found quite credibly is that there's little or no relationship to renter protections and housing production, that we are seeing other factors that are much more related to that. Couple things. If you have a question or concern, please put it in the chat. We will be looking to the chat to address those questions and concerns as we go. We also are going to have a little presentation on what it means to have normal wear and tear in your apartment. One of the top complaints of tenants is retrieving your security deposit. And one of the issues that we see all the time is landlords saying that you owe for common wear and tear that is considered damage by the landlord, when it is not damage at all. It's considered something that the landlord has to deal with when you move out. So what's the difference between damage and normal wear and tear? We'll discuss that after Matt Cournoyer's presentation from the Department of Housing and Community Affairs. So with that, let me turn it over to Matt. And Matt, please introduce yourself and tell us about you. You're a new employee at Department of Housing and Community Affairs. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. It's great to be here, and it's good to connect with folks from Renters Alliance and partner organizations. I am relatively new to the department. I joined in July. I'm the Public and Legislative Affairs Manager for DHCA, so that means I handle kind of three main functions at the department. I work on our media relations and public affairs functions, or public events, and putting out our press releases, responding to media inquiries. I facilitate our legislative and policy work with the county council and with the state legislative session. As you know, we're a few weeks out from the end of the state session, so there's been a lot of activity there on various housing related bills and making sure the county has our voice represented. And then I work on community engagement and really hope to continue to increase the work that we're doing on community engagement. We're hiring another person now. We're in the process of that to work in the director's office and handle some of those community engagement activities as well. In terms of my background, I've spent my career working for the federal government up until now, and most recently was with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau for the last few years. And I worked on their stakeholder engagement team, working with nonprofit organizations. And we had a robust program there, a much larger team than we do have at DHCA, but a process that it didn't just involve reaching out to organizations to share what we were doing, but to make sure that we were getting good feedback and information from advocates, from nonprofits and think tanks, and bringing that into the department, into the policymaking process. And I'm hoping to expand that and replicate that as I continue my work at DHCA. So with that in mind, one of the things that Matt invited me to share about was this information on what we're seeing with rent stabilization and the data that we're looking at with respect to the law itself and with respect to the housing production over the last few years, because like Matt, we're interested in having good data out there. We want to see robust data that's kind of looking at all aspects of this and not just kind of cherry picking different pieces of data that may tell one piece of the story, but not the whole story. So let me get my deck up here. This is the... Okay, we're looking at the full screen, I hope. Okay. So we put out last month a report on the first 18 months of rent stabilization. So the law passed in July of 2023. Implementation was effective in July of 2024. And so we have data now on the first 18 months of the law. And kind of the headline of the report is that the law is working as intended, right? The law was intended to stop these kind of large rent spikes that are the kind of rent increases that can displace people from their homes, as well as to cut down on things like junk fees and hidden fees that can be used to circumvent the limits in the law. And the law also has a number of accommodations for landlords to be able to raise rent, to be able to make the kind of maintenance and repairs that we do want to see to maintain the health and safety of the housing stock. And so that's all outlined in the report. And my presentation tonight, I'm not going to delve into every piece of the report. It is available. It's linked to on the homepage of DHCA. We can share a link as well. But that kind of breaks down in the report the numbers of what the Office of Rent Stabilization, which was established at DHCA after the law was passed, is doing to make sure that the law is being implemented, that people who have complaints, tenants who have complaints are able to file them with the department, and that we're working with landlords to make sure that they know how to follow the law and that they're able to access the various accommodations that I mentioned a moment ago. So just kind of one slide to highlight a couple pieces of what the law is doing, right? So one of the reasons it's a little bit tricky to report out on the law and how it's working is because what we hope is happening is that rents aren't getting raised above the limit, right? We hope that it's working and landlords are following the limits that are in the law and that we don't see a large number of complaints. But when we do get complaints that come to the Office of Rent Stabilization, what we do is the investigators on the team look into the complaint, and if it's a founded complaint, then we work to enforce the limit. We work to refund overcharges that may have already been paid by tenants, and that's the number on the right, showing that we have refunded money that's been already paid out. And then, looking forward ahead on leases, if the proposed rent increase is above the limit in the law, we enforce the limit. If it's a non-rent stabilized property, the office also looks into that and tries to negotiate a lower rent. And what you see in the bar chart there is that for say 1-year leases, the average savings is $95 a month. So that's real savings over the course of the lease. And again, this is just for the units that we received complaints about. And that $68,000, I think that the fact that that is a relatively low sum for the number of renters that we have in the county, I think speaks to the fact that overall we are seeing compliance and landlords are, by and large, following the limits that are outlined in the law, and it is working as intended. Another piece that's really, we like to highlight about how the law is working is with respect to troubled properties in the county. So our code enforcement team has been implementing for a number of years now a troubled properties law that you may be familiar with. And this requires the code enforcement team to inspect all multifamily properties in the county on a cyclical basis. For most properties, it occurs on a 3-year cycle. And we inspect a percentage of the properties within each, the units within each property. And based on the number of violations of a particular kind, serious health and safety violations that we find, if a certain number of violations are found, we designate the properties as troubled or at risk. And one of the benefits of the rent stabilization law is that for properties that are rent stabilized that are designated as troubled, they're not able to raise their rents at all. And so this is really an important stick that we have in the law to compel enforcement and to make sure that properties are taking the steps needed to get off that troubled properties list, make sure that the health and safety of the units is in good shape. And what you're seeing on this slide is that between 2024 and 2025, we saw a pretty drastic decrease in the number of units in troubled and at-risk properties across the county. It was a 69% drop in the number of units designated troubled and a more than 50% decrease in the number in at-risk properties. So in addition to the benefits on preventing big rent spikes, we are also seeing a meaningful improvement in the health and safety of the housing stock. But as Matt alluded to at the beginning, there is this question kind of overhanging a lot of the public discourse on rent stabilization, and that is this regulation contributing to housing development decreases in the county. And what we want to do is kind of look at what developers are saying, what landlords are saying, look at the data and kind of see what matches up and what doesn't. And so here, I thought I would start kind of with what a small subset of landlords are saying. I'm going to reprint here what has been shared in a recent report that was put out in the fall by the planning department, looking at projects in the development pipeline. It's a relatively small number of developers, right? So I think one of the things we don't want to do is kind of overstate what we're seeing from folks that are reporting out in these surveys. But based on the 47 responses and 14 in-depth interviews, what we're hearing is that projects that are stalled in the pipeline, developers are pointing to quite a few different types of barriers to development. They did cite rent stabilization. They also cited high interest rates, rising construction costs, regulations and permitting processes, infrastructure requirements as among the factors. And I think kind of importantly, one of the things to take away here is that even in the small number of responses that they did get about the impact of rent stabilization, is that views were pretty mixed about the actual direct financial impact of the policy on multifamily rental operations. Instead, to the extent that there was any sort of impact cited from rent stabilization on development, the impact was attributed to headline effects, right? This idea that financing isn't happening in the county for multifamily development. And to me, what that says is that there's not enough information out there about how the rent stabilization law is successfully accommodating the interests of landlords in protecting their investments while still ensuring that renters don't see a significant rent increase. Because in reality, there are a number of provisions in the law that allow for this to take place. So just to tick through a few really briefly, I think these are good points to have in mind if we're discussing what the law actually looks like. First is the blanket exemption for all properties that are 23 years old or less that allows that allows a rent, for properties that are at least 23 years old, the ones that are rent stabilized, there is the ability to have rent increases of the inflation rate plus 3% or capped at 6%. And this is above most of the rent increases in the county, the average rent increases in the county over the last couple decades. There are a range of exemptions for landlords, including what I mentioned, that 23-year exemption. We can also approve at DHCA rent increases and surcharge so that landlords can make a fair return on their investment and capital improvements. We received a small number of these petitions in the first 18 months of the law. We reviewed them, ensured that they were compliant with the requirements, and we approved all the petitions that we had, which was it was 3 fair return petitions and 3 capital improvement petitions in that period. So not a large number. The options are out there for landlords to access this if they need it. And we have had a lot of contact with landlords throughout the process, providing technical assistance to landlords that apply for this, as well as hosting outreach events for landlords specifically. We want to increase the outreach that we're doing there to make sure that everyone's aware of the various flexibilities and accommodations in the law. And lastly, I will note on this slide, I alluded to it earlier, that in terms of the tenant protections here, there are protections in the law for preventing the kind of fee increases that can basically circumvent the rent limits in the law. And this is important for tenants. I think it's also important for landlords to be able to compete on a level playing field so that the prices that are being advertised for rental properties are transparently what they actually are and aren't being added onto with all these hidden fees on the back end. So what do the housing construction numbers actually look like? So I've got on the slide here, we've got some real fresh numbers up until 2026 and in the first January and February of 2026. So this is pretty current. And one of the pieces that I want to point to is kind of on the slide. I've got a red mark with where rent stabilization was passed in 2023, because one of the headline pieces that you'll see from some of the opponents of the legislation will be that there was a significant drop in the housing construction in Montgomery County. And it's true, we have seen a big dip. Matt alluded to that earlier. In 2025, we've had a big drop in the number of units permitted, but this is not immediately after rent stabilization. Rent stabilization passed in 2023, and in 2024, you'll see that there were over 2,000 multifamily units permitted in Montgomery County. And that's actually a number that outpaces most of the jurisdictions in the region. There are some data sets out there that show what other jurisdictions have permitted. I don't have them in this presentation, in part because the numbers are pretty hard to come by. We've been working to improve the data that we have from other jurisdictions in the area, but most of the data sets that are out there come from Census Bureau survey data, which is a bit inconsistent across jurisdictions in terms of how and when jurisdictions report housing construction numbers. And so it's not always apples to apples. But when we do look at that census data, what we see is a higher number of units in Montgomery County in 2024 compared to other jurisdictions, and then a decline in 2025 that we are also seeing in jurisdictions around the country. Rent stabilization passed in 2023. While it didn't go into effect in 2024, keep in mind that any projects that are new have this exemption from rent stabilization for 23 years. And so none of the new projects are affected by rent stabilization if they were built in 2024. There's not a significant difference in how they're affected if they waited a year. So if there was this big chilling effect, you would expect to see a drop in 2024. That didn't happen, right? We saw an increase, and the decline that we're seeing in 2025 really coincides more with the broader trends in the macroeconomy associated with the inflation, with the federal cuts, and in particular in the DC region, the impact of cuts to federal staffing on the region, to the budgets of the local and state jurisdictions. We've seen high returns demanded by private equity investors, high construction material and labor costs, as well as the impact of tariffs and even immigration enforcement affecting labor supply. There was a report that the Center for American Progress put out in the end of 2025 that looked at tariffs and estimated that the administration's tariffs could result in as many as 450,000 fewer new homes through 2030. Obviously, we continue to see uncertainty, the Supreme Court weighing in on tariffs, and we don't know what that's going to look like. But the takeaway is that these factors that are happening with the federal administration that are disrupting costs and disrupting certainty for developers, I think really have a dominant effect here. That's what we're seeing both locally and nationally. And yet, what we are seeing so far in 2026 is a bit of a rebound. At the end of 2025 and into 2026, we are starting to see more projects getting permitted. That 801 number, like I said, is just through the month of February, and we do hope to see more, right? We want to see more supply, and what we want to do is look at what is actually, causing these supply contractions and not over attribute it to the regulatory changes like rent stabilization. This slide here kind of speaks to how the cycle in housing construction in Montgomery County has been affected by various economic shocks in the past. I think this gives you a sense of how significant the dips can be after certain recessionary periods, the COVID-19 pandemic and recession. This ends in 2025. This is, as you see here on the slide, the data goes through August. This slide is from the Department of Permitting Services. I didn't have the raw data myself to update this with the newest numbers. This also includes single family and townhome construction. The other data I was showing was about the multifamily rentals. And so this is a slightly different cut of the data, but I think a useful one in examining how the construction has been historically affected by the past recessionary periods. But it is also important to look, in our opinion, not just at the housing permit numbers, right? Because the permit numbers are kind of just one step in the development process. So when a housing development is coming into the pipeline, it starts at the stage of the planning application, goes through various stages of multiple plans and approvals with the planning board. Ultimately, then goes on to the Department of Permitting Services with various types of construction permits and review. Eventually we'll reach a stage with the use and occupancy permit after that construction's completed. And then the Department of Housing and Community Affairs will issue rental licenses for the multifamily rental properties, or will register the common ownership communities for, condominiums, right? So there's many stages beyond permitting. Permitting can be one kind of useful snapshot, but it is just a snapshot. And particularly when we're trying to look ahead at whether there's demand still for developing housing in the county, it can be useful to look at planning applications. And so this slide looks at the development tracker that the planning board puts out. The planning department has instituted a new development tracker as of the fall, which breaks down planning applications into two categories. It looks at projects where there's been any initial approvals for any initial planning approvals for the development projects. So that basically means they've got at least their what's called adequate public facilities approvals. And then there is sort of the full planning approval stage, which can give an indication of projects that are even closer to moving forward, because it is possible that projects that are in the planning board, it's common in the planning tracker, it's common that they may not move forward for one reason or another, or a portion of the project won't move forward. So it's useful to have these multiple cuts of looking at where projects are in the process. And what we do see here on this slide is the number of unbuilt units that have been added to that tracker, to that pipeline, has increased after rent stabilization passed in 2023, showing continued and increasing demand for building new housing in Montgomery County. And the green text on the bottom of the slide shows that in 2025, last year, developments with a total of 3,300 units received full planning board approval, meaning that they are ready to go ahead and begin the permitting process. So they may not all move forward, right? But the point is that they've seen some movement just in the last year alone. That's a significant number. And that doesn't align with this idea that there's not interest in development in the county. The bar graph on the slide shows in 2025, the number of projects that just received initial planning board approval. So while it is true that there are projects that are in the development tracker that have been there for a long time that are stalled, there are also many new projects that are coming in, that are entering the pipeline at this early stage right now. And so this gives us a good sense of the fact that there's demand and what this could look like in the years ahead.
Matt, if I could just interrupt briefly to ask a question.
Yep.
Are each of these bars apples to apples? That is, what goes into that measure is the same as 2019?
Yes.
So whatever it is, whatever the sausage factory of how these numbers are brought up, if they are used to represent activity in housing production, we saw a downturn, as the rest of the nation did, during 22, 23, 24, and then an upturn in 2025.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, some of the reason you see in this cycle too is not just the macroeconomic factors, but it's sort of that natural cycle of development in the county too, right? I mean, we had such a large spike in 2024, like I mentioned, compared to the rest of the region. So it's natural that as those projects are getting developed, getting built out, you might start to see a little bit of a decline and then a pickup. So it's not an unusual cycle to see. And it just further emphasizes why it's important to kind of expand the number of years that you're looking at, expand the number of data points that you're looking at, and really kind of observe the various factors that are at play here, because it's not just one factor. And sorry, go ahead, Matt.
So I'm just going to say, so if you had a mind to cherry pick and to show that a hell's bells because of rent stabilization, you would focus in on a narrow period of time instead of expanding out to look at the overall flow. And then you would see the ups and downs of that kind of production. And that, as you see, we're on an upswing. So one thing might have nothing to do with the other.
Yeah, absolutely right. And we're not prejudging what the causes might be here. We're trying to look at all the different possible causes. But if we're not looking at all these factors, then we're not going to be proposing the right policy solutions. And so let's see. Okay, so what I wanted to also do, right, was talk about DHCA's role in some of this, the county's role in some of this, because the solutions here involve not just making sure that we have increased supply of any kind of housing, but about making sure that we've got increased supply of housing that's affordable at all income levels across all parts of the county, right? Because the evidence that supply by itself is going to bring down housing costs is, let's say, mixed at best. I think there's been a couple of good articles over the last couple months in the New York Times, Washington Post, highlighting some recent studies out of Georgetown, London School of Economics, these academic studies that show that supply by itself, particularly in tight rental markets where there's high demand for housing, is not necessarily sufficient to bring down costs. So that's not to argue against supply for supply's sake, or it's not to argue against supply, but it's to argue against supply as a tool to bring down housing costs. And so we have tools, we have policy tools available at the county to help boost the supply of affordable housing. And in particularly in that tight rental market where there is macroeconomic factors at play that are affecting the ability to build at efficient costs, we want to make sure that we have programs that are bringing affordable housing into the market. So a couple of these are our moderately priced dwelling units program, which requires new developments of single-family homes and multifamily homes to reserve a proportion of the new developments for homes that are affordable at 70% of area median income or below. This program has been around since 1974. As you may know, it was one of the first inclusionary zoning programs in the country. And we've been able to see a steady stream of new MPDUs on the market through this program over the last several decades. Maybe not as many as in the 1980s there on this graph, but this is a continued boost to the supply of affordable housing in the county. The other tool that we have that is important is our ability to directly finance affordable housing projects. And this slide shows the work that DHCA has done to invest money in affordable housing units over the last 8 years. And this is through our direct loans. This is primarily loans as well as some grant money. And it is in projects that both produce new housing as well as preserve existing affordable housing. That's a key piece for us, right? We don't want housing that is maybe naturally occurring affordable housing or that has been subsidized in the past to be lost to the market if they're not able to support themselves after that time period. And so we're able to reinvest new money in those projects. And the total number of projects here is over 9,000 units in this period. We've had an increase in the amount that the county council has been appropriating to our affordable housing funds over the last several years. We do expect to see fewer funds appropriated in the coming fiscal year because of the budget constraints that we are all facing in the region. And so that may decrease the number that we're able to produce next year, but we're going to keep pushing forward with what we can. We have a number of projects in the pipeline, a lot of demand there. And these, as I mentioned, are loans primarily. So we, get money back in from the loans that we have out there, reinvest that in more production, and that's going to help make sure that we can keep that supply of affordable housing up, so that we are not just increasing supply, but that we're also increasing the number of affordable units at all income levels. So I covered a lot of ground there. I don't know if you had other stuff you wanted me to touch on, Matt, but I thought I would kind of stop there.
Well, let's open it up to anybody. If you have a question, please put it in the chat. I do see one in the QA, but please put it in the chat. I'll ask the one from the QA. Is this development tracker on planning applications for both units being built for sale and units being built for rent?
Yes.
Or just for rental housing units?
It's both. It covers both. And if you go to the planning board's website, search for development tracker, it's a nice GIS application. It's easy to use. You can go in and kind of click through and it'll show you what's in there, which project specifically it's referring to.
Okay, staff, have we seen anything else in the chat?
Well, I was going to add just one quick thing. I'm sorry if it's hard to do, but I don't know if you want to bring it back up, but the line graph one where you said when the rent stabilization law began on that, was that multifamily permitting on that one, or was that kind of the down there? Yeah,
that's multifamily permits. Yeah.
Okay, if you don't mind just leaving that up for a second, sorry, but if I could just reiterate a point I heard Matt make about folks trying to take a snapshot of something to make, you know, a correlation seem like causation. One of the blog posts I saw posted in several places that got some traction, social media and things, kept referring to a 90-something% decrease. And just so folks know, if you look, Q4 2024 Q4 is where that data began, and where rent stabilization supposedly began for that particular blog post, and only went and stopped but at the end of Q3 2025. So I think it's just, you know, I appreciate you giving the context here so we can point that out, and how that, you know, the more hyperbolic things I saw online were related to that period only.
Yeah, the hyperbole was that, you know, housing market has cratered. So they said, you know, it's over. We're all done. And again, to emphasize that that particular slowdown was national. And so other regions had similar slowdowns for a lot of reasons. We've got a federal administration that's creating a lot of uncertainty in the market. And, you know, people are jittery, especially people who spend big money. If you're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on developing big apartment buildings, you're going to want to wait and see where things are going. But as Matt pointed out, if you stretch this out, you see ups and downs in the market all the time. And so what's the bigger picture here in terms of housing development? And seems that contrary to their hyperbole, the housing development is going back up again, and it wouldn't if they were right.
Yeah, so thank you again for that. Yeah, not only is the rent stabilization past date earlier, but anybody who was following the Discord and the lead up to that knows the landlord developer industry was well aware that was coming long before that too. So I know, that's always great context. And then just one other thing in the chat, I did see Austin, Texas referred to, and I don't know if that's it's supposed to be because there, you know, was building that happened there and rents came down, but it's always good just to mention that the elasticity of demand is a thing that doesn't get talked about very much, and essentially boils down to, you know, a lot of those places just simply are not the DC area, and all the other factors that Matt is talking about are just, you know, not going to change overnight, and so both Matts in this case. So again, just appreciate the context. I wanted to add on a couple of things there. Oh, and then lastly, we did have one that came to us about preservation. I mean, I saw you talked about the preservation fund, and I wanted to highlight that because someone asked a question about, you just lamented seeing perfectly usable buildings maybe getting knocked down in favor of just, you know, newer ones that might be able to bring in a little more. So I was glad to see, you know, preservation highlighted there, and hopefully that person did too.
It's also worth knowing about the Sun Belt, the supposed miracle that the landlord developers like to point to in their narrative. But they did build a lot down there and prices did come down. But one of the reasons why it came down, as David points out, is demand cratered, so to speak. And one of the reasons why it went down is because places like Florida and Louisiana, places around the Gulf, places along the South Atlantic started experiencing severe weather situations where people were going like, I don't know if I want to move down there, and not to mention the politics. So, you know, demand is critical.
Yeah, and my point isn't to argue against supply as a factor in prices, like the, you know, classical supply demand model here, but to say that it's more complicated than just, you know, more supply is going to bring down prices, that it does depend on the market factors, like David was saying, in terms of demand and whether or not you know, how tight the market is, and also just right, if the argument is that we're talking about rent stabilization, we have to keep in mind that the outcome here that we're interested in is, it's not just supply for supply's sake. What we want is this range of options for people at a different affordability levels, at different parts of the county. We want rental availability. We want home ownership opportunities, and we want to be able to measure all these different outcomes and not just, you know, again, have that cherry picking of data.
Right. But also keeping in mind that from our perspective, the Renters Alliance, we are often faced with the idea that we can build our way out of the housing affordability crisis. And maybe you can in some regions where you can flood the market and create such competition that rents will come down and prices for new houses will come down. But the problem with Montgomery County and the Washington, D.C. area, New York, San Francisco, Seattle, other places around the country, is that we have consistently high demand, which is one of the reasons why we're one of the preferred places to build where possible. And we've seen that across the country in places that already have good cause eviction protection, rent stabilization, strong code enforcement, and so on, that they also remain in the top 20 of housing production regions in the country. It needs to be noted that these are high demand regions where there are good paying jobs, and that has more to do with what's happening than building more housing. If we build a lot more housing in this region, we will have people moving into it quickly, and we're not likely to see the prices go down for future rents, much less for the existing rents for the existing population, because demand is so high. Other questions for Matt Cournoyer?
Yeah, there's a question from Saul. He's asking, do you have any info or data on the independent municipalities who are exempt from the law?
What specifically are you looking for, Saul? We can tell you that Gaithersburg and Rockville do not have rent stabilization, though they have a very strong and growing voice of renters organizing to demand it, particularly in Rockville with Rockville Renters United, whom we honored at our annual building community celebration for their outstanding work organizing in that region. Bear in mind, not to be a downer about how long things take, but we were the first regional nonprofit dedicated exclusively to renter outreach, education, organizing, and advocacy in Maryland. And we've taken 16 years to get a lot of just a handful of things done, including a very modest rent stabilization program. So Gaithersburg is now online to get that to happen, and then Rockville too. But this is all fairly new kind of activism for local government. So we still got a ways to go, but they're doing a terrific job.
There was another question, and I don't know if Matt has the answer to this, but someone asked how much has been in the annual Montgomery County budget for the affordable housing investments?
Matt, do you know the HIF number?
For the current fiscal year, the HIF, the total fund that we had available for housing loans in the current fiscal year is $213 million, and that's a combination of county funds as well as a little bit of federal dollars, and it's a number of the different funds that we have. That's the top line number, the breakdown.
I know this
Spread
is not
across a
fair,
few
Matt,
different
but do you recall what the previous number was in the previous fiscal year? Because I think that's up significantly from what it was.
It is up, and I do have slides, but they're not in this deck, so I don't
Fair.
recall. But
We
it's
won't
been a
hold you
steady
to it.
increase, let's say, over the last 3-4 years, post-COVID.
Last I checked on it, and I don't know that this was last year, it might have been a few years before, but it was 100 million. So I think we've doubled in the last few years. I think that's probably a fair estimate. However, bear in mind that most apartment buildings cost 100 to 200 to 300 million dollars to build. So the amount that the county can subsidize or lend to is still only a small amount.
Yeah, the demand for the funds exceeds what we have.
So it sounds like a lot of money if you win it in the lottery, but it's not a lot if you're in the multifamily housing industry.
I guess there was a follow-up on that. How much is the county proposing for the new budget? Not sure if we have.
That is I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me. It is available. The operating budget was released on Friday, and so there's information there if you want to go to the county's website and look at what's in there. It's a drop off from the previous year, given the constraints that I think everyone's aware of that the county has.
Thank you. Got another question. Again, not sure if we know if we can answer this right now. Can you clarify what, if any, limits there are on rent increases in exempt buildings that are exempt because they're under a deed restriction? For example, because they received a county loan.
I think it would depend on the deed restriction. If there's a question about a specific property, I'm happy to, follow up on that if anybody wanted to reach out directly. I could, check on the status of it, but some of this just depends on the particular property and the particular regulatory agreement.
Sure, okay. Thank you.
Somebody asked about out migration, and that it's one of the variables that everybody is dealing with right now. Might have something to do with why the housing increase now isn't spiked up further. There's a lot of uncertainty in the market. We're at war. We have a administration that is uneven at best. We lost, I think, about 50,000 people who are residents of Montgomery County. We've gone from 1.1 million to 1.5 million 50,000 about. And how many of those are immigrants who are impacted by deportation or threat of deportation? I know a significant number of them were impacted by affordability and simply had to move from their homes because they couldn't afford to live here any longer. Many were also part of being laid off by the federal layoffs. So there are lots of anxiety-provoking variables that everybody's having to contend with right now.
And I guess someone followed up on the question about buildings exempt by the deeds. They're specifically talking about Tacoma Park. Tacoma Park has their own rent stabilization law, but Matt from DHCA did put his email in the chat, if you have questions about your specific property. But again, Tacoma Park, Rockville, and Gaithersburg, or do not fall under the county's rent stabilization law.
I see a question about a payment plan. This may be off topic, but we're happy to answer it. If you have a payment plan agreement with a property manager or landlord, and they decide to break that agreement, then you might have the basis for a complaint with the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs. We're certainly willing to take a look and help guide you and give you our advice. We're not lawyers, but we certainly know something about how this works. But I do hope whatever agreement you have is in writing, and that you can prove that the property management or landlord has signed their side of it, so that you have an agreement, a formal agreement. A handshake might not do in order to address breaking an agreement.
I also saw two other questions that weren't about the presentation. Someone asked about the renter tax credit, and I put in the chat that one of our partners, the Housing Initiative Partnership, they typically can help you see if you're eligible and they can help you apply for the tax credit. I put and we've had them on previous town halls to kind of walk us through that process, but if you need one-on-one assistance, you can contact the Housing Initiative Partnership, and I put their number in the chat if you just scroll up. We also had another general comment / question about the wait list for HOC vouchers being years long. What should the low-income people who are not able to afford renting in Montgomery County do in the meantime? Are there any transition programs? Very difficult for many, especially a gap between salaries and increase of living costs. We're very aware that there's a lot of people in this situation whose incomes just simply can't keep up with cost of living in Montgomery County, especially if you have unregulated rent increases. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of options out there. If you want, there are some certain programs, like if you're a senior or if there's someone in your household who's disabled, there might be additional subsidies that are available to you. But unfortunately, there's not enough subsidies to meet the need that is out there. So if you're having a specific situation, I would just recommend reaching out to us at the Renters Alliance. Tell us a little bit more about your demographics, and we can see if there's a program specifically for you. But unless anyone else wants to chime in, I would say generally it's very limited other than applying for a HOC voucher, which yes, definitely takes years.
Emily, since you mentioned the question that Colleen had in the chat, I did want to clarify that it was helpful that the exemptions for the county the rent stabilization law are about the unit level. So if the unit is subject to, the regulatory agreement, then it's kind of followed the terms of that regulatory agreement that would, depend on what that is. And that's the same for kind of all the exemptions in the law. They're at the unit level, not the property level.
To Mark, I'm sorry, to Marcia, I'm not sure what the vacancy rate up or down is right now. We do know that on average it was about 1.5%, which is much lower than other regions of the country. So indicating that demand is very high. Whether that's come down or not, or should say, it's gone up to 2% or 3%, I don't know. Matt, do you have any idea if the vacancy rate for rental apartments has increased?
I don't have the current data. We're still processing our most recent rental survey data. When we have that, we'll have a more accurate current vacancy rate.
Intuitively, it tells me that it is because going up because of so many people being destabilized because of the federal impacts on immigration and on layoffs. However, demand remains high too. So people moving out, somebody comes in right after. I'm not sure. So we'll wait for DHCA to provide those data points. I'm not sure about the Eastern Silver Spring communities plan. Does anybody have any idea?
Not sure.
I do not know. We could take a look, see, but we don't know anything about it tonight. Sorry, Mark.
Another question, maybe need some clarification on this. Can you please repost the eligibility of the renters, abilities and for elderly and disabled? I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to. If you could clarify, we can better answer that.
Perhaps maybe rep, maybe?
Yeah, Kelly, if you want to let us know exactly what you're talking about, we can try to answer that. And not seeing any other new questions.
Did we
Right.
get to Michael's question about the surrounding counties?
No.
So Michael asked, he said there was a great point that Matt made about the timing of the passage and implementation. And he was wondering if you knew what the permitting trend around 2023 was for Howard County, PG County, Nova, DC, or Rockville. I guess we mentioned the municipalities. Like what about single family homes compared to multifamily data? So he was wondering if you just had any information about that.
Yeah, it's a good question, one that we've been working on trying to get better updated, validated data. There have been some bar graphs that got put out last year that reference that census data that I was saying. But the problem with the census data that I mentioned earlier was that that's dependent on jurisdictions reporting. And we identified that, there were some significant problems with how Montgomery County had been reporting the data for a number of years that had to get corrected. And so it gave us some pause about how other jurisdictions are reporting as well. So what we have that got published in the fall was some data that showed that Montgomery County outpaced most of the other jurisdictions in the area in 2024. So that year after the rent stabilization passed, we did permit less than many of the other jurisdictions in 2025, which made it into some of the talking points about the impacts of rent stabilization. But I do not want to also cherry pick the data. So what I'd like is better updated data. You can look at some of the anecdata that's out there. If you look at the Washington Business Journal or BizNow, and you can see the reports of other big projects in DC or Northern Virginia that have had their projects canceled, permits pulled, whatever, canceled because of the impacts of the economic factors. And that gives, us reason to think that this is a regional trend, but we want to update that data. So the short answer is I don't have it all the way
Something you said
up to date.
earlier, Matt, excuse me for interrupting, something you said earlier about not being apples to apples. I mean, Annapolis is not the same market as Montgomery County. Montgomery is closest to Washington, D.C. It has the largest population of renters in the state of Maryland and has its own unique benefits being in Montgomery County. It's the wealthiest county in the state, probably one of the wealthiest in the world. And its infrastructure reflects that in many ways, particularly the school system. And so comparing that to, say, St. Mary's and their housing development would not be apples to apples. Not to mention what you're saying, Matt, about the way in which they collect data. And then if we have the issue of not apples to apples internally in Montgomery County, because the way we collected data in 1967 is different from the way we collect it now.
And then the apples to apples piece also applies to the what I was when I was kind of explaining the whole development process, because not every county or jurisdiction has the same process and the same steps in the process. So we're trying to take this one snapshot and look at housing construction permits, but that doesn't always mean the same thing in every county. So it's worth pausing, asking the questions anytime you see the data. Are we looking at the same data? And is this telling a story that is comparable to what's going on in Montgomery County?
And probably, since it gets cited so much, Northern Virginia is also not apples to apples with Montgomery County and Southern Maryland. They also have their own unique circumstances and data collection, I imagine. And so, rushing to why Northern Virginia might more of this or less of that would not be comparing apples to apples. All right. Anything else for our guest?
Not for Matt, just to follow up on the tax credit program. They were asking about the eligibility. Again, I would recommend contacting the Housing Initiative Partnership for more details, but I did post a link to the state site where you can download the application, fill it out online. Typically the tax credit is for people over 60, someone has a permanent disability, or they have a dependent under 18. But you can check out that link for more, or again, contact the Housing Initiative Partnership.
All right. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you very much and welcome to Matt Cornoria from DHCA. We will have you back in the future with more data, and we are thankful that you're on the team. We welcome you and welcome your information, and look forward to working with you down the road.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here. Appreciate it.
All right, Matt. Then let me turn it over to Jackie and Emily, who will give us an overview of the normal wear and tear pamphlet provided by the Department of Housing and Community Affairs, so that we can have some understanding of how security deposits law works, and what you might have to pay for in damages and what you might not have to pay for in damages.
All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jackie and I'm the Outreach Director. I want to reiterate what Matt said before. Again, one of the most common complaints that the Office of Landlord-Tenant Affairs receives concerns deductions that are made by a landlord from a security deposit for damages in excess of ordinary wear and tear. This is the ordinary wear and tear pamphlet that is offered by the Office of Landlord-Tenant Affairs. And essentially what it does is that it's a guideline for responsibilities of landlords and tenants regarding the maintenance of their rental property. And copies of this can be printed right off of the Office of Landlord-Tenant Affairs website. I'm just going to add that in here again. All right. And I'm just going to scroll down. Emily and I are going to kind of walk through briefly some of the important things to kind of highlight here within the wear and tear pamphlet. And so Emily is going to discuss with you a little bit about what a security deposit is and the move-in checklist.
Sure, thanks, Jackie. Could you scroll down to the next slide?
Further?
Yeah,
There
this
we
one right here. Thank you.
go.
Yeah. So, some people think that the security deposit is like a fund for the landlord that they can use at any time. That is not true. The security deposit is only to insure the landlord in the event that you damage the property beyond the normal wear and tear. So it's to protect the landlord from financial loss if, there was significant damage to the property. But they can't just be taken from that fund throughout the your lease term to to fix the carpet, to put in a new appliance. That's not what the fund is for. And typically you should be getting your full security deposit back plus the interest as long as you didn't damage beyond the ordinary wear and tear that happens in an apartment. And so we're going to talk about what ordinary is and then what excessive wear and tear is.
Okay.
So uh, something that we recommend to renters is that when you're moving into your apartment, you want to do a walkthrough inspection. And there's a checklist here. And again, you can download this and print it out so you have it with you when you're walking through. It kind of goes through the different things in your apartment, the appliances, the doors, the walls, the carpet. Um, as you're going through, you want to be taking pictures and taking a video. So if you see that there's a scratch in the wall a substantial scratch in the wall right here, or a crack in a shower tile, you definitely want to get that on video in a picture and note it on your inspection checklist. That way that when you're moving out and you're doing your walkthrough inspection, property manager or landlord can't point to that and say, "Hey, you're responsible for that. We're going to be taking that out of your security deposit." You can point to the video or the picture which has the timestamp from a year ago when you moved in, saying, that was here when I moved in. And you can also have your checklist to point to. So basically, you're going to want to go room by room and just make note of any damages that already exist prior to your move-in.
And I'm gonna kind of go through what the difference is between ordinary wear and tear and damage. Okay. So a landlord may withhold the security deposit to cover the actual cost of damages beyond ordinary and tear. However, the landlord is not automatically entitled to be reimbursed for all that deterioration. So ordinary and tear. So if there's minor marks on the wall or nicks in the wall, that's considered ordinary wear and tear. Damage is like a hole in the wall larger than like a nail size that you would use to hang a picture or something. Like punch a wall, that's considered damage. Faded, cracked, or chipped paint, that's ordinary wear and tear. The little kids get to doing some artwork in the bedroom with their crayon, that's damage. So that will be something that you consider damage. Plaster cracks from settling, loose wallpaper, that's considered ordinary, but if it's ripped or torn wallpaper, I don't know if many people still have wallpaper, but that's considered damage. And then carpeting and curtains turning slightly worn or faded by the sun, that's considered ordinary. Torn, stained, or burned carpeting or curtains, that's considered damage. And I also wanted to just point out something, that carpeting is the responsibility of the tenant after you moved in. You just want to ensure when you move in that you have a nice new carpet, but for the time of your tenancy, it's your responsibility to keep it in good condition. Maybe after a number of years, you could possibly request to get it replaced, but their landlord is not required to replace it for you. So you want to make sure you keep it as in good condition as possible, unless there is like a tripping hazard or some mold or something that requires you, like a safety hazard that requires you to have to replace it. And so I'm not going to go through this whole list, but it is important that you go through this wear and tear booklet to kind of see what's considered wear and what's considered damage. But it's a very exhaustive list here.
And I would also just gonna add, Jackie pointed out that the landlord doesn't have a requirement to change the carpet unless there is a tripping hazard. We get a lot of questions from tenants who said that, they lived there for 10 or 15 years and they would like their carpet replaced. Unfortunately, they're not required to, but you can always try to negotiate unless it is a tripping hazard. However, while you don't have the right to get the carpet replaced just because it's old, for paint for the walls, you can request that your apartment is repainted every 5 years. And then they are required to do that at your request every 5 years.
Can I go back just to the carpet a bit? If there is a tripping hazard that you caused, you're responsible to fix it. If it's a tripping hazard because of normal wear and tear, or because of some damage that the property management or landlord did to the carpet, then they're responsible to fix it. Either way, a tripping hazard is a code violation. So just bear in mind, if you brought up some furniture and tore the carpet and it's a tripping hazard, you're going to be responsible for fixing it.
And I'll also say, so hopefully when you move in, you'll have done your walkthrough inspection. So now it's the end of your lease and you're moving out. 15 days before move out, you can request to do a walkthrough inspection with the property manager present. Same thing as when you move in, you're going to be going through with them. And pointing out any damages that occurred during your tenancy. Um, After you move out, so the landlord or the property manager has 45 days to return your security deposit in full by first class certified mail. So make sure when you move out, you give them your new forwarding address, because if you don't give them the forwarding address and they just send it to the same mailbox, it is the tenant's responsibility to give that forwarding address. So make sure that you do that.
And to do it in writing so that you can prove you did it.
Yeah, everything in writing, it'll never hurt you. It'll always come to your aid. If hopefully you don't need it, but if you need it, you'll be glad you had it in writing. Now let's say that you damage the dishwasher, you damage a window, something like that. If they're going to be withholding some of your security deposit, because again, it wasn't just ordinary wear and tear, you did something, you punched a hole in the wall, something happened, that um within those 45 days, even if they're not going to be giving the full security deposit back, the landlord has, by that first class certified mail, they need to give you a breakdown of what the charges are. So, if it's $200 to replace the damaged window that you damaged as the tenant, they need to give you the actual cost of the charge. It can't be an estimate. Oh, we haven't called the contractor yet. We think this might be $700. No, they need to have the actual cost there. Um, and again, that if the landlord doesn't notify you, or they don't send you that mail within 45 days, you can be entitled to damages up to 3 times what your security deposit is. And in that case, you're gonna want to contact the Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs, and that's when you can submit to them, your documentation that you provided your forwarding address, you moved out 50 days ago, and you didn't receive anything, and you have your video of your walkthrough showing that there was no damage, and the property manager also agreed to that. That's something that you'd want to take to the Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs, and we will
And
put
if you
the
have any
information.
if you have any questions about anything that Emily and I have just discussed about ordinary wear and tear, again, we're here to answer your questions. Just email us at info@rentersalliance.org or call us at 888-668-7717. We'll be happy to answer your questions.
And this is
There's
oh,
sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, yeah, that this pamphlet is a really good resource to have. Maybe it has some things that you wouldn't, if it's your first time renting, or you just wouldn't think about. Definitely recommend checking it out. And you can also, like I said, you can also print it so that you have that checklist.
There's a question from Kelly. Hey, Kelly. I worked with Kelly before. So she asked if her wheelchair had caused damage in locations. I don't know if you mentioned that, at like certain transition points, due to her disability. Would that count as normal wear and tear?
No, it would be any damage that the tenant did to the apartment. And there wouldn't be any reasonable accommodation for that.
So the tenant is liable for that, is what you're saying?
That's right.
How often the carpet should be replaced? Should the furniture be moved at the renter's expense? I've lived in the unit for 20 years. Am I entitled to new refrigerator, any other appliances? Again, there's no requirement for the carpet to be replaced just because you've lived there for a substantial number of years, only if there's a tripping hazard. Should the furniture be moved for that at the renter's expense? I guess if they agreed, let's say you just requested them to replace the carpet and you've lived there for 10 years and they agreed, yeah, it will be the renter's responsibility to move the furniture out of the way so that they can come do that. As far as new appliances, I don't believe that you're entitled to a new appliance unless something breaks. And in that case, they're not required to give you a new refrigerator, only one that's in good working order. I know sometimes tenants, they're hoping that they get a new one, that'd be great, but the landlord's not required to. You can, of course, ask, like all things, but the law does not require them to replace appliances just for being old. And if they're broken, they only have to give you a working one, not a brand new one. Yeah, Tim put the link to the checklist in the chat. Let us know if you can't access that. We can always send you links. Any other
And let's look up the interest calculator. All security deposits by law are to be kept in a separate interest-bearing account. if you have one that's more than 20 or 30 years old, it was actually getting some good interest. But they changed the law, I think back in 2015, maybe, I forgot the date. But now it's only about 1 or 1.5% interest. The state of Maryland does have an interest calculator for security deposits that begins, I think, in 2015. Am I right? Anybody?
I'm putting in the chat.
And you could put, your security deposit amount in there when you put it in, when you gave them the security deposit, and what it's worth now when you move out. Again, 45 days, they have to give you by certified mail a list of damages, that is qualified damages, and what it actually cost to repair those damages. Not what they think it's going to cost, not what they project it's going to cost, not an estimate. They have to say, this is what it cost. We paid for it. We made these repairs, and this is why we're deducting X amount from your security deposit. If you do not receive that within 45 days, the law says that they forfeit any right to any part of the security deposit. If they fight you and are, very much unreasonable about it, and this is rare, but you could win up to 3 times the amount of your security deposit if you contest it and the landlord is obviously abusive. Also, we have seen landlords charging for remaking the kitchen or buying new appliances or doing such things. They're not allowed to do that. So if you have any doubts, so we'd love to take a look at what the landlord is telling you. And we can also guide you to enforcement if it is something that is a severe violation. Any other questions?
Not
Then we'll
see-
move on to,
Oh.
thank you, everybody. Thank you,
Oh,
Emily.
wait, sorry.
Sorry,
Oh,
go
Matt, we
ahead.
just got one. You were right. It is 2015 is when the interest rate calculation kicked in. So someone asked, what if you've been renting before 2015? How would you calculate that?
Your interest is calculated based on when you gave the security deposit. So if you gave your security deposit 30 years ago, it's the interest that was allowable 30 years ago. I'm not sure what that was, but it was a lot more than what it was in 2015. Okay. Well, great. That's normal wear and tear. Again, make sure that you do a walkthrough before you go in. Take pictures that are time-stamped of anything. You do this if you rented a car. And how many of you all have rented a car and you return it and they say you're responsible for that ding? I take a video of the car all the way around before I leave the lot so that I know that I'm not going to be responsible for any damage when I return it. Your apartment is a lot more expensive than a car rental. So definitely when you move in, take pictures that are time-stamped and demand a walkthrough that with a checklist so that you have something of when you started. And then, of course, when you move out, do the same thing and take pictures so that especially if you think you have a landlord that's going to play some tricks and try to squeeze some money out of you that they're not entitled to. So with that, yes, Emily?
Another question came in. How to get the law changed on appliances? I guess a requirement to make them new. As far as I know, there's no current legislation being put forth to advocate for that. But you can always reach out to your council member, to your state delegate, your state senator. Might be a little bit tricky to get passed, but I'm sure a lot of people would be happy if that went into law. So I can put a link in the chat to look up who your legislator is, and you can contact them.
Yeah, probably a county at the county level might be smarter on that one, but I'm doubting that would go through. Sorry to be a downer. But I do think that the carpet thing might be something that we'd love to see updated that might have a lot more traction. Carpet. But I think that maybe not every 5 years, like getting your apartment painted every 5 years, but it seems that if you could show through normal wear and tear that your carpet is exhausted, that ought to be considered something that ought to be replaced. And maybe it's not a matter of time factor, but it may be a matter of whether the carpet has just simply worn out. So with that, let me turn to Tim. Give us an update on things we need to know about Alta and code.
Sure, thanks, Matt. So relevant to the security deposit, there's the Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs, which will help mediate issues with your management over things like your security deposit or your lease. If you have any, complaints about that, feel free to submit a complaint. And we'll link the information to that. You can also call 311 if you're in Montgomery County. And we're happy to, if anyone has any questions of, what kinds of things should be, how you should file a complaint or what kind of things should be complained about. We're happy to kind of be look at what you're looking at and give our advice on that. And if you live in the municipal cities of Tacoma Park, Gaithersburg, or Rockville, you have your own Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs, or we say OLTA for short. So feel free to go through them for those issues. On the other side of that coin is code enforcement, which deals with all other things that are structural or things breaking physically with your unit, right? Like let's say there's mold, leaks, appliances being broken. If your carpet is, if you think your carpet's a tripping hazard, things like that, you can try to file a complaint with code enforcement and they will send an inspector out and do a visual inspection and determine whether it's something that is against the code. If it's a violation, then they will issue notices of violations to your management and give them a time frame to fix it. And the process for both these offices is that we would recommend letting your management know about these issues first, and then after, if you think that the issue hasn't been resolved to your liking, then you can reach out to these agencies. And for code issues, those how much time you want to give your management is up to kind of reasonable common sense and good judgment, right? If it's something like emergency, if it's like a leak, if the management doesn't respond to a leak in 24 hours, I would definitely reach out to code enforcement. If they are taking a couple days to respond to something like, I don't know, like an appliance being broken, I think that's more reasonable. But it's up to use your good judgment. Feel free to reach out and we can always give some advice on that, or come out and take a look. And we all linked those things in the chat. You can call 301 or visit the website. And for the cities of Rockville and Gaithersburg only, you have your own code enforcement. Tacoma Park uses the counties. And yeah, anything else?
That's great. Thanks. Just remember the two differences. OLTA is about your rights and your lease, and code enforcement is about maintenance issues. So keep that in mind. And if you're not sure whether to file a complaint or not, we can always help you. You can reach out to us. We'll give you our best advice as to where you are in the process and whether it's time to file a complaint or not, or some other method of addressing the issue. David?
Yeah, I think I'm going to mention the ACE program, which stands for Access to Counsel in Evictions. And so this is a state-funded program that provides representation lawyers for tenants who are facing eviction. As y'all know, if you go down to court, landlords are virtually, especially the corporate ones, are virtually always represented in these cases. Tenants almost never. So the purpose of this program was to provide same-day representation as one part of it. So if you go down, there should be there from lawyers from CASA, from Maryland Legal Aid, and from Community Legal Services are our three local partners. You can see them there at the court if you go down there, but we highly recommend, and they do too, reaching out in advance by calling 211, and that will get you paired with one of these legal service providers. So if you get a court summons for rent court, or for any kind of, you're facing any kind of eviction and you get a court summons, that can be brought to County Department of Health and Human Services to be evaluated for rental assistance. Even before you get a summons, though, when you have a notice of intent to file, what's called a 10-day notice sometimes, even earlier than that's when you can call 211, or if you get a notice to vacate or something like that. So that's for, again, the Access to Counsel and Evictions program. For folks that want to speak to an attorney about something that's not in a pending eviction, like possibly rent escrow, or we had some of these security deposit things coming up here. At the district court on the second floor, there is the Court Help Center. You can walk in there and get advice and counsel from an attorney about, and they can show you what to file and things. They won't represent you fully, but they can give you advice there. I'll leave it at that. Who am I passing it to now?
Yeah, sorry, I was answering a question in the chat and my phone was ringing at the same time. If someone has claimed that their landlord has lost their security deposit, what do you do? Well, first of all, you have to be able to prove that you gave a security deposit. So I trust you have a canceled check or some other correspondence that says you paid a certain amount of a security deposit. If you did, the landlord can't say that they lost it unless the landlord is 9 years old. So that's just not going to be acceptable. Tell them, first demand, I'm sorry you lost it, find it, and demand that they give it back with interest. Absent that, if they're resistant, you will need to file a complaint with the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs. That would be my recommendation. But make sure that you have evidence that you have a security deposit, how much it was, when you provided it, and so on. But you can't just lose your security deposit. If you have no proof that you gave the security deposit, it's going to be your word against the landlords, and that might be a difficult case to resolve. Okay, Pat, you want to tell us a little bit about why it's important to form a tenants association?
Well, just to finish up what you were talking about, that's why communication is so important. If you have a problem in your apartment during your tenancy, make sure you have something written that went to the property manager, the date and the problem. Where I used to work, if it wasn't written, it wasn't done. So make sure you keep all your records, dates, talk to the property manager, and have your ducks in a row. Okay, just a reminder to all of my fellow renters how important it is to vote. Whether we have a lot of, I guess, people running coming up, a lot of legislators in the counties, in the districts, and in the state. So it's incumbent upon you to find out which legislators think that renters deserve adequate, affordable housing. So please vote. Go to the vote box and put your vote in. That is our power, renters' power. So please.
And if you want, I'm a renter and I vote button, send us an email at info@rentersalliance.org and with your address, and we'll send you a button. Tell us if you got a tenants association, then we'll send you a bunch of buttons.
Yep.
So let us know. And about tenants associations, let me just say, one of the things the Renters Alliance spends a lot of its time doing is creating, strengthening, and supporting tenants associations. There shouldn't be an apartment building in Montgomery County that doesn't have some form of a tenants association. So help, work with us and we'll help you. If you think it's time for getting organized in your building, and we recommend it's always a good time, then please reach out to us at info@rentersalliance.org or at the 888 number, which I'm sure somebody put in the chat already, and let us know, and we'll make a point of coming out to your building. We'll meet with you, and then we'll try to set up a community meeting and see about getting active. Don't wait until you've got problems in the building to work collectively. Sometimes I know it's counterintuitive, but if you love your property manager and your landlords, terrific people, and you think, well, why do I need to set up a tenants association? That's when you need to set up a tenants association, so that you help build community, you know your neighbors, you can work freely amongst each other, communicate freely amongst each other, and it is less likely that you'll have problems down the road because the management will know, the landlord will know that you're already acting collectively, and they won't want to turn the entire community against them if they decide to do something that's inappropriate or abusive. So that's a good time to do it. And not all tenants associations are about complaining. They're also about, creating community, as we say in our slogan. building community. So knowing your neighbors, taking care of one another, increasing the quality of life in the building, activities, and so on. This is what the real hallmarks of a great tenants association are all about. So with that, do we have any other questions or concerns?
There was just that one question I think you were in the middle of answering about the landlord losing their security deposit in the chat.
Sorry, say again?
There's just that one question I saw that OTG already answered about. There was a landlord who lost his security deposit. I think you're in the middle of answering that.
I addressed that. So if they need to find it. If you can't prove that you gave it, it's going to be a bit problematic.
That's right.
And you can reach out to us. We can guide you further on that if there are some specifics. Our next town hall will be on April 15th on tax day. So we will announce the topic at that time. There's a lot happening in the Maryland General Assembly, including pending good cause legislation, which once again is stalled in the Senate. But we're going to keep working on it to see that that protection is enacted in the state of Maryland. So with that, I thank Matt Cornoyer, if I pronounced that correctly, from the Department of Housing and Community Affairs. Josh Fisher, our board treasurer, who keeps track of our money, make sure we're doing the right thing, and all of our staff here tonight.